Welcome to the Project Management Happy Hour. Our aim is to share frank and honest discussion about real-world issues in project management, but do it in a way that's not too dry, though it might get a bit salty sometimes. Are you defining project success wrong? Most PMs do, with PMI's Dave Garrett. Hey, Kate. Today, you know who we've got on?
Dave Garrett.
We have PMI on. This is the first time we've had an official representative from Project Management Institute come join us on the podcast. I'm so happy.
I'm really looking forward to our audience hearing the conversation that we had. And guys, I just enjoy that. I don't know if I could say this. I'm just like, we have been talking about this stuff the entire time we've done this podcast, and now PMI is changing it. And I'm like, who's copying who?
Welcome, PMI. We'll give you a great big hug. We love it. But joining us is actually someone super cool from PMI. His name is Dave Garrett. And Dave Garrett is a senior advisor there. He focuses on key projects important to PMI's mission and community. Dave previously served as the Chief Strategy and Growth Officer, VP of Corporate Development and Innovation, VP of Transformation, and did a whole bunch of other things at PMI.
Dave also co-founded projectmanagement.com in 2000, which at the time was ganthead.com, and served as its CEO for 17 years.
And that's so cool because way back then, when I was just a little noob project manager, I was a Gantt head all the time. So it's really cool to meet the person behind that. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to see you.
We're so happy to have you on. And as we get started, I'd love to start with a question that I love to ask all of our guests, and it's this. What is the most valuable business lesson that you had to learn the hard way?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I'd have to say it's that everything can change overnight. And I think that's particularly applicable today when the world is like in chaos. You know, there's so much going on. There's so many variables, so many balls in the air, that you really have to be prepared for a lot of different scenarios. You have to understand your risks. You have to really get your head around the big picture. And, for me, the realization that everything could change overnight was when I was building Ganthead. We talked a little bit about building Ganthead, projectmanagement.com, an online community of project managers that I founded back during the .com boom. I founded it way back in 1999, launched in March of 2000. April of 2000 was the crash, the stock market crash. So we went from grow. We started off with 32 employees to direction from our board that was, within days of that said, you have to be profitable by the end of the year, whatever. So we went through a whole business model change. We went from, looking at subscriptions as our main revenue driver to advertising as our main revenue driver, which was counterintuitive because that's what was going to hell. That was what was problematic at that point, for many .coms. And I look back on that. We made it through fine. We actually, in month 10, we started becoming profitable, but that was with 17 employees instead of 32, which, we had to go through some unfortunate times there, but sometimes you have to do that. And I think when I look back at those times, they look an awful lot like now. The .com boom looks an awful lot like the AI boom right now.
Yeah.
And it's not that you don't think the technology is going to be valuable. It's that there's certain parts of it that are overblown, overbuilt, overborrowed, and you end up in a place where you have a lot of unpredictability. What happens if the market were to crash tomorrow, next week, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now? It's really hard to predict that. But at some point, there's going to be some sort of a change, a drop in the valuation of some of these huge internet companies. It's going to affect the whole economy, the global economy, and it's going to affect a lot of people running businesses, running projects in various ways. If you are running a project for an organization where everything changes, your world's going to change too. You're going to lose resources. You're going to, things are going to be different in some way. And so the idea there, I think, is just to be prepared for what you see as the major risks that are out there. And, be ready to deal with them and be flexible and agile, if you will, small a agile, and go from there.
Oof, that's rough. I think what's funny too is when you look out on the market, you can think everything's fine because no one else is sharing this. I was a big fan of Gantt Head, and I never ever would have guessed, probably by design, that you went through those kinds of challenges.
Yeah, I guess, I think every small business goes through some challenges like that. It always takes longer to become profitable than you think. And you have pressures that are surprises to everyone. Back then I was a kid. Everybody running a .com was a kid with no experience. And, when I say a kid, I was in my 20s or late 20s, early 30s, that kind of thing. But to me, that's a kid at this point.
All right, Dave. So one of the things we're really looking forward to talking with you today is that PMI, Project Management Institute, the state, the solid organization, which has helped define the current profession and has done so for decades, is changing. Speaking of change, one of its most fundamental definitions, which is that of project success. And so we're really looking forward to hearing more about that from you. So I guess, first of all, is it really a change? Because it feels like a change. It sounds like a change, but is it really a seismic change as we might think of it from the outside?
It's funny. It's PMI had not explicitly defined project success before now. There was always the triple constraint, which was presumed to be a goal of the project. And, whether you call that success or not is something different. But a lot of people talked about things like project failure rates and project success rates, what percentage of projects are successful or failures, that sort of thing. But there are a lot of different definitions of success. Mostly they're specific to the project, right? You have a set of metrics that are reflective of what you're trying to do, and those become the definition of success. I need to meet this set of metrics. And in addition to that set of metrics, of course, you have the triple constraint, budget, schedule, scope. Those three things are always there. And often in the past, especially, early on, you're right. A lot of people viewed that because people viewed projects as more predictive, they viewed the triple constraint as something you could align to and stay with for the life of the project, versus as something that's more of a guideline that you should be flexible with, that, in exchange for creation of value. And that's more of our perspective at this point. Our new definition of success, of project success, is a project delivering value that is worth the effort and expense. So it's a very simple, high-level definition, very sort of subjective. The beauty's in the eye of the beholder sort of thing. It's value to me is different from value to you, is different from value to Kate. We all have our own perspectives. Part of the magic of being a project professional is you need to be able to bring those perspectives together, align those perspectives, and get everyone marching in the same direction so you have the same view of what success looks like for your project. And that's the value you're creating.
I'm, for one, am very excited about this new definition because project value is something that Kim and I have been talking about on this podcast ever since we started it. We are so focused on what is the success criteria? How will things be different whenever this project is done? Like, we are obsessed with that because probably from, a lesson we've both learned the hard way is delivering a project perfectly. Right. Only to, at the end of it, have somebody say, that's not what I wanted at all. And there's that very famous, meme on the internet about building a tire swing where it's like what the customer wanted, and then there's what the developer heard, what the product manager said, what the engineer built, right? It's on and on. So yes, this definition that's much more focused on, what's really the value that we're going to get out of this, and did it deliver that value that we wanted, is, I think, overdue. I am elated. So
no, that's really cool. I think, the example we often use is fighter jets. And, fighter jets cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to build, right? And you could have a fighter jet these days go off completely perfectly in terms of the triple constraint, and pretty much go off as planned. And then anything that rolls off of that assembly line, anything that the end product gets produced, and people are going to criticize it because we're no longer in an era of manned air battle or whatever you want to call it. You've got drones now to do that. And, what are we doing building fighter jets? Because even though this fighter jets have been in the planning, production, all that for a decade or more, we didn't know back then. But today, the utility of that fighter jet is far lower. The context has changed. The world's changed. The big picture's changed. So we need to make sure we keep an eye on that big picture, understand what's going on in the world and its impact on the project that we're taking forward. Or you could get everything right and still be a failure in your stakeholders' eyes.
Yeah.
Or your project would be a failure. Not necessarily you, but
I am the failure. That's the problem in project management, is that I think I'm the failure. Oh gosh, it'll be a different podcast. But what about those PMs who've lived and died by the Iron Triangle for the past 20 years? Are they going to struggle with this change? How do we want them to think about this now?
I think some of them are, and I think it's partly in the way you view the job. You're right. It's if you've been doing something for a long time in one way and your employer's expectations are aligned with that perspective, like there's some organizations you walk in there and the expectation of the people that the PMO or the people that the project manager reports into is that that person will be monitoring the schedule, the budget, the scope, and simply reporting status. And, that's most of their jobs, the box checker, the order taker, that level of project manager, project administrator, if you will, it is another way of putting it. That's a job, and in a highly predictive environment that can work, but those environments they're not as prevalent as they once were, or maybe they never were prevalent, and we're just now adjusting to that. So I think it's a world where everyone should change. Some people won't because of where they are in their careers and the context that they live within, the expectations that are set for them. But I imagine those need to change over time anyway, just as organizations need to become more agile. All the people that work for those organizations need to become more agile as well.
I definitely agree. I do think that the rigidity of some of the project practices, it just in general, can really prevent a project from being able to respond with speed when things need to change. So I do think that, there's definitely a bias to wanting to put a structure in place, be able to follow that, have clear, measurable, defined ways that you're defining success. But I think it's so interesting because I do think you can get better success metrics if you focus on what the value is than just merely by measuring things like scope and whatnot. Because even the nature of measuring scope is kind of a messy beast because that is also a pretty subjective discussion. So I'm like, get on it.
Yeah.
That's been my whole career, has been like learning how to keep up with all these changes. And so I guess if you're luxurious enough to be a project manager who has just been able to hold on to these three for your 20-year career, I'm jealous of you because that's not what I did.
Well, it's a much simpler life if you do that, right? It's simple. You know these three things and you're golden, right? If you're thinking about something more subjective, then it's like the ground's moving underneath your feet. You need to keep up. So it's a different mindset, different approach.
Mm-hmm. I talked about this today with our members. I have a client I'm working with, and like I'm a version of her project manager. But I could, because of the way that she works, I could not possibly put into place like a standard project kickoff process. Like she's really averse to those things. Mm-hmm. And so we were supposed to have launched a couple of days ago. We are mid figuring out how we're launching. It's a little bit messy, but it is happening. Like all the work that we're doing right now is being managed rigorously because it has to be in order to get everything out the door. It's almost like she can't think about how things are going to get done until they are happening, which is not ideal. It's a little bit immature from a leadership standpoint, but like her business is very successful and profitable. So it's not like she's doing anything wrong. And so I was telling my team today, I was like, yeah, I think next time I'm just going to move the launch date up and just tell her it's got to launch earlier to just get us into like, we're doing the work, which is not a real kickoff process. But that's a nonsense way to approach things, but it will work for her. It's just a different type of flavor of approaching that. So it's, I'm really curious, like if my nonsense advice is going to work.
It's interesting though, that one of the hardest parts of a kickoff is having that clear vision of success, mm-hmm. that it's not necessarily all the metrics, all the, the underpinnings of it, but being able to communicate the vision of success in a way that's clear to everyone, aligned, everyone gets it and they're motivated by it.
Yeah.
That's really, it's a tough thing to do, but it's essential. And it comes before all of the other, how do you measure it? You need to know what you're doing before you can figure out how you can measure it.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave, for the jury, would you please state in very clear terms PMI's current definition of project success?
Yes. A successful project is one that delivers value that is worth the effort and expense. Does that make sense, or should I go expand on that?
I love it. Yeah, I would just want to make sure I got space for that tattoo on my arm. So if you can elaborate, just take it one step further.
We often express this as a mathematical equation, even though it's not math. It's value and then a greater than sign, effort plus expense. So if you want to do a tattoo, I'd go that way. It's a little more succinct.
All right. Now, along with the new definition of success, we've been exposed to this new concept of MORE, M-O-R-E. It's something we're starting to hear a lot more come out of PMI around this. And
Kim, is it something we're hearing a lot more about? This is terrible. I'm sorry.
You're so bad.
Edit that out.
No, definitely don't edit that out.
No, God, it's terrible.
Definitely don't. And even as Kate and I prepared our presentations for PMI Global, there was a real focus to draw a line or multiple lines from our topics and the things we covered to this new MORE concept. And so I expected something in the project management community we'll start to hear more and more of. And so can you explain a little bit more about MORE?
I'll try to. I think we all struggle with that. We naturally, as human beings, use the word more so much that, we want to have project managers or project professionals do more. Do we mean more, whatever. Anyway, more is a call to action. So Pierre, our CEO for the last 3 years, came on board. He came on board 3 years ago, started doing a lot of listening around our community, around, our organization, around our whole sort of ecosystem. He was out there in the world and still is traveling all the time, talking to people. And he heard a number of things. He heard, project managers felt invisible. They felt like they weren't really a part of things, part of the team, they weren't seen as drivers, of value creation. They were more seen as administrators, order takers, whatever way you want to put that. And they all felt like if things went bad, they got the blame. If things went well, they didn't never get the credit, right? And I'm speaking extremes now. I'm sure not everyone feels like this, but
I think it's a really common way to feel in project management, right? Because on top of that, some of the, early training or like thought leadership was also like, if you're the PM, don't take all the credit for a successful project. You're supposed to give it to your team. That's part of the way of like being a good leader. But then that contributes to that invisibleness. And absolutely, if things go wrong, I am bad. I believe we covered this earlier. I am a failure. So there's, I think that's been pretty well proven.
Yeah. So it's a thing, right? So it exists. And at the same time, you'll recall the whole ChatGPT thing happened in end of 2023. And since then, everybody's been talking about AI and its impact on jobs in general, its impact on the work of a project manager. And thinking through all that, we've done, and we were doing a lot of research in AI and trying to understand what is the impact going to be on project management. We didn't think it was going to be anywhere close to, I think Gartner said it would replace 70% of what a project manager does. That turned out to be a pretty ridiculous number, especially so far from what we've seen.
Yeah.
But we saw that it's going to augment a lot of what a project manager does, make them a better project manager in a lot of ways. And also the machine learning side has already been helping automate some of the scheduling aspects of project management. A lot of the other things that are more rote, giving them, the project managers, easy drafts of, say, a project charter, that kind of thing, to refine and make better. There's a lot of things in there that make you better, make you faster, make you stronger. And that's wonderful. So as part of that vision of the future, Pierre wanted to make sure that a project manager did feel valued, did feel like they were driving value, because that's an important part of any profession like this, especially, all change comes through projects, right? So you want the person managing those projects to feel like they're really driving that change. When we looked at AI, for instance, we saw a lot of this change in the work of the project manager being making it more human, make it so the relationship building that a project manager does, the way that a project manager's unique experience in an industry, a project type, their background and their knowledge of that project type could feed into relationship building and alignment of people and just all the human work that happens based on the project manager's skills and experience. We see the future as the administrative being far less of a project manager's job because of AI and other sort of technological developments, and a lot more of a project manager's work being very human, very, all about the relationships, all about the constant high touch work that they do with stakeholders, or they should be doing with stakeholders. Ironically, that doesn't really happen with someone who's very triple constraint oriented. You think about, I'm going to worry about what's in my project box, and I'm going to meet the triple constraint and go forward from there. I will hear from the project sponsor when he or she is mad, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Versus being proactive, versus getting out there and saying, you know what, things are going well. We're within the triple constraint, but I have an idea because I talked to Tom, Jerry, and Max, and they said if we do these things in combination, we'll get even more value out of this. It might mean a little more money, or it might mean a little more time, but I think you're going to like this as an option. I wanted to present it to you. That kind of proactive stance is what we see as the future of the project profession. And I think that's important for a lot of people to consider. Anyone who wants to progress in their career, move on to something that may or may not be managing projects, but, where you need to know the business, you need to have the business acumen to sort of move up from where you are. It's really important to be able to speak to the business, the problems of the business, the way the business works. And it's also important to have those power skills. The talent triangle that we had forever still holds. You have technical skills, you have to understand the processes and what to apply when, given your context. And you need the business acumen, in order to understand business mechanics, how business works, how the different functions work together, just business as a whole. And then you need to have the human skills of being able to influence people, build relationships, gain trust, all of that kind of stuff is really where we see the future of the profession, where we see people needing to focus.
I love the human focus spin. It's so good. As well as the lean. It feels like there's also a lean more into leadership as well through this different change, which is so much better for us as people in the organization than memorizing a stack of 3x5 cards with inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs that are this thick, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, all those things are still important. They're foundational. The triple constraint is still foundational. You need to be mindful of that, or things could really go off the rails. But it's not the focus or the point of the project. It's more of a guideline, something that you need to be flexible with, but something that is important to understand and be mindful of. But the way that we express today, or for the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, the way we've expressed this forward-looking vision, this call to action, this change in the way that project professionals work is called MORE, M-O-R-E. The M in MORE is about managing perceptions. So managing the perceptions of your stakeholders, having that close relationship, understanding the business, treating them as a business partner, if you will, so you can collaborate with them to create those forward-looking options that may generate even more value than what you're looking at today. So it's just working closely with those stakeholders, and that's core to what MORE is. O is about owning project success, not just project execution, not just project management, but the success of the project, actually achieving the value that you're targeting in a way that's understood by all your major stakeholders. So you don't want somebody at the end of this saying it was a failure, even though, and be arguing about like, oh, when I met the budget, I met the, the timeline, and, that's a losing argument every time. And it's one that probably too many of us have leaned on, So I think we need to be mindful of that and owning project success along with the, your stakeholders who own it by default. They probably own part of the business area that you're going to be handing this thing off to, once after project close. You just need to be aligned with them in a way that feels like you have a stake in the game. It's important to you, just like it's important to them that they achieve that value that they're targeting. So that's ownership, and that's central to the mindset. R is for relentlessly reassessing project parameters, which is kind of a mouthful, right? But the idea is, it's fundamental to agility. If you think about agile practices and agile mindset and that sort of thing, to be reassessing pretty consistently. But this is about not just reassessing, but reassessing proactively. You're not being reactive. You're not even just being responsive. Like a few years ago, we talked about sensing and responding a lot, right? It's about being proactive in understanding what the possibilities are and presenting those. Because in the fast-paced world that we live in today, it's different from even 5 years ago. This is like a post-VUCA world. I don't even know what we're calling it these days, but things are moving awful fast. And there's a lot of variables, we've got trade tariffs now, or whatever, there's just a lot to deal with. So reassessing and doing that in partnership with your stakeholders is a really important part of leading a project. Then finally, E is for expanding your perspective. And it's interesting, you could think about that from a number of sort of levels of granularity, So you could think about there's my project, and I could just be focusing on that with blinders, and you don't want to do that. So you open up your blinders a little bit more, and you see other projects that your project is connected to. Maybe there's value that's coming out of the combination of your project and some other project, right? So you want to be aware of that. There's linkages. You want to be aware of the impact that your project has on functional areas, the people within those functional areas. You want to be aware of, obviously, the impact on strategy, the organizational strategy from your project. So that's, often the foundational bit related to measures, and that's what you usually measure that kind of value if you can. What is the value of your project on organizational partners, on the end customer of your organization? That's huge. That's something we found in the project success work. Your most important stakeholder is the end customer. If anything is touching your end customer from a project perspective, that's your most important stakeholder. We've talked for years about having the customer in the room, being customer centric, all that since the 90s business has been talking about. In the project world, you don't hear that much, But as part of this project success work, we found that to be a very important factor, that the customer should be in the room, the customer should be included, thought of as a stakeholder, and brought into the conversation in some form. So that's critically important. And then you can go beyond that to society and the world. What is the impact of, what you're doing on our world? And if you look at PMI's mission, it isn't just to maximize project success. It's maximize project success to elevate our world. So we aim to, in every project effort, to have some form of goal or something related to maybe UN SDG or some form of social good mapping to the project. And we find actually when we do that, we actually double our chances of success. When we look at the kind of, the success rate as we measure it, we call it NPSS, the Net Project Success Score. And that's how we measure the success of that project.
All right. So that's more. Let's run through this again, Kate. Let's see if we can do it. See if we can answer this on all four of these.
Oh, God. You're pop quizzing me?
Or it's a pop quiz. If we get this right, Dave, you need to talk to Pierre about getting us a PDU. All right. You're going to be our guy on the inside. All right. So first is M. Remember what M is for?
Yeah, Kim, tell us what M is for.
M is for managed perceptions, right?
Okay.
That's really good. And O?
It's about ownership.
Ownership. Own that project success. It's not just getting your plan done. You've got to take ownership of that, get that stuff done. R?
Relentlessly reevaluate something.
Yes. Relentlessly reassess project parameters. Or always checking, are we on track? Are we doing the right thing? Are we pointing in the right direction? And the last one, E?
I expand
your perspectives.
Because
our projects can have big impacts on different groups. And I can recite all these because I have the white paper up in front of me. So
yeah, I was doing it from memory. So every word I got correct, I would like half a point for on my score.
You should get a PDU for each one of those. All right. So how do we do, Dave?
You did great. You did great. That's wonderful. It's more about the spirit of all of this and the collective impact of having, we sometimes refer to more as a mindset. It's sort of like all four of these things play well together. And if you have that ownership piece down, you own the success, you own the value you're trying to deliver, you naturally want to talk to your stakeholders and really, understand that more deeply, understand how to get there a little more effectively, efficiently. And, that's part of the reassessment bit. And you're opening up the lens, you're using a fisheye lens to look at the world, trying to take it all in. What is that expansive view you can take of the world that helps you consider everything you need to consider, all the stakeholders you need to consider.
It's so interesting because I think when we talked about this, you had said that the frameworks or tools to use for each one of these success frameworks is in development right now, right? Like there's no actionable takeaways yet for how to have more ownership or how to relentlessly reassess the project, right? Like if we wanted to be like, how could I take these away and go apply them right now? Is there something that PMI is going to be offering to support this approach and mindset to project management?
Yeah. I'd say there's actually a lot in the current PMBOK and if you look at the business analysis techniques and that sort of thing in the PBA, if you look at benefits realization process, that sort of thing, there are a lot of tools in there that you can use to apply more. They're just not labeled that way. So there is that. This year's project success work that'll be released in November, you'll see more of a practice level look at more. It'll be broken out into the practices, MORE, will be broken out into practices. So you'll have that. And we will provide training on some level for more. You'll see that, later this year, maybe next year, that sort of thing. But soon we'll be providing more training on more. So I think, what we're going to, we've been promoting the mindset itself, which I think has value in and of itself. You can understand what these things are. You have your own way of applying them. And there's a subset of project managers that are already doing these things sort of naturally, right? The really advanced project managers are doing these things naturally. So they're showing other people how to do them, mentoring and helping as well. So this isn't something that doesn't exist in the world. It's something we want to make more prevalent or the norm.
Yeah, I think great project managers kind of instinctively do this stuff already. So it's really nice to have it codified and formalized so we can teach the next generation.
Yeah. Every project manager I have looked up to has done at least 2 out of 4, if not 3 out of 4 of these things really consistently. Some of the folks that we've even had on as guests that we've worked with in the past, Kim, are phenomenal at these things. And, one of Kim's favorite topics for a long time on this podcast has been, should you kill your project? Like, does it still need to exist, or is it not aligned to the business priorities anymore? Which is silly but true, which is about relentlessly reassessing. Right. A lot of what I get like up my own butt about is like, what do you want at the end of this project? Like, what is success? What is your very clear vision? Finding different ways to put that down for your stakeholders and say it back to them, to have them tell you in their words what that clear vision is, so that then you can execute to that. And whenever something starts to deviate from that in your delivery, bring that back to them for their guidance. Because otherwise, like, most stakeholders don't necessarily, I don't want to say they don't care about the triple constraint, but it's like the triple constraint only matters within the context of project success. One of my favorite examples to give is like, if you had a project building a house and it's your dream house, and your dream house includes some sort of like beautiful marble countertop, and that marble countertop is broken in transit to you. And the option is to either do whatever, like go to Home Depot, get that countertop that's not your dream one and be done on time, or take a delay of 6 weeks to totally finish the project to get a new one shipped into you, and you choose that other option, was the project a failure because you had to wait 6 weeks? Like, I don't think so. If I got my dream house out of it, then a 6 weeks delay for something I'm going to have for the rest of my life is a gigantic success because it's my dream house. But I don't think that is really thought of enough out there in the world.
No, absolutely. It's all about context, and there are situations like, if you think about, you have to putting a regulatory process or policy in place or something, that's about timing,
sure.
Right? So you say, I need by a certain date, I need to have this in place and
absolutely
enforced and all that. So then schedule becomes super important, but that's a contextual thing. It's the type of project you're dealing with. Most projects, there is a very subjective value component that you need to understand really well, and I like what you're saying about defining success. And if you say something like, what does success look like, as a starting point, I think that's a really nice way to talk about it, because you could talk about elements of it and have, you're trying to paint a picture, and the person you're talking to is trying to paint a picture of what that is by breaking it down to components. Maybe this measure looks like this, or maybe that, these people do their jobs better in this way, or whatever it is, but you get a sense for what's really important as you paint the picture together. That kind of collaboration, I think, is magic, if you're really trying to get things right.
One story I'd like to share is the first time I heard about the new definition of success was I was actually at a conference with Rich Maltzman, who is a speaker. We've had him on the podcast. We were in Bulgaria, of all places, and he was giving the keynote. And he was talking about a story. He's from Boston, and he was telling a story about the Big Dig. And for our listeners, if you don't know the Big Dig, it was this massive civil engineering project in Boston to actually build freeways under the ground. And it was kind of infamous for being way, way over budget, way, way over time. But part of that, they, put these tunnels underground, which were freeways. And after they opened up the freeways, they had these giant lights, or 110-pound lights on the ceiling to illuminate the tunnel. They started to fall down. And, you can imagine a 110-pound light falling down on a car while you're going 60 miles an hour. And there was actually somebody who got killed by this.
Terrifying. Very sad.
They investigated it. And turns out that even though everybody knows very corrosive road conditions in Boston, there's water, there's salt, there's moisture, to presumably try to save cost, to try to preserve some of those triple constraints that were out of whack from being over budget, they skimped. They got cheap straps to hold the lights up, but they were not corrosion resistant. So not only did that cause a life to be lost, but then they had to spend millions of dollars shutting down the tunnels and ripping out the old ones and putting in new ones. And so the lesson that Rich was trying to share was that, okay, that this is where success in terms of triple constraints definitely does not necessarily have a direct translation to success for the product or the project and the value it's supposed to deliver.
Yeah. And you can picture the pressure that those project leaders were under. The Big Dig, I'm old enough to remember, getting from Logan Airport to the city, it was a nightmare. It was tough every time you flew into Boston. And people would talk about nothing but the Big Dig. The Big Dig was at fault for every, bad thing that happened in Boston. It snowed really hard. Oh, it's the Big Dig, And so they were under a lot of pressure to finish, under a lot of pressure to, just get done and try to be more stick with the budget more than they had been. It was over budget, overrunning in every way. And, to say, oh, we need better straps, or to say we need better, what we need to secure these. And, somebody's going to say, prove it. And how are you going to do that? It's hard to do these things. Sometimes it's hard to be proactive. It's hard to be even responsive to what is right. But it pays off in the end to do that. You'd hate to be the person who made that decision and then somebody subsequently lost their life over it. Wow. You got to carry that with you.
Well, let us then transition to our favorite end of show topic. You might be in trouble if, from that note to another. But we do like to go through some you might be in trouble if. So what are some you might be in trouble ifs here whenever we're thinking about more in this new definition of project success?
Yeah, I think you might be in trouble if the value you're creating isn't well understood by all the stakeholders and isn't visible. One of the things I really like about agile practices is the whole make work visible thing. I think we need to think about making value visible.
Yeah.
Understanding, like the path to value and how you're progressing towards that path to value as you're executing your project, and actually after you're executing your project. Not all value is realized when most value is not realized right when a project closes. You're creating the mechanism to create the value often within the project.
Usually.
And so you need to, be mindful of that. And you need to understand the path to value and make value visible to everyone. That's how they believe in the project. They see the value being created, and, they can predict that all the value you guys talked about and worked through collaboratively is going to happen because, here I can see it right here in this way. So that's important. And I think it's also troubling if you look around and there's sort of no reframing of, there's no team or stakeholder collaboration or reassessment when conditions change. You're going to have things change along the way. And if everybody just says, oh, that's a change, and it's not really going to affect us, and they kind of blow it off, that's problematic, right? You think that shouldn't be blown off. A lot of things need a closer look.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully you're going to be proactive about it. And if not that, then hopefully at least responsive.
Yeah. When a change comes up on some of the stuff I'm working on now, especially if people make a quick decision, I'm like, all right, let's just walk through how things would be different. So if X is in place, what would Y look like? What would Z look like? Just trying to get us to think through that. Yeah. If you don't, that's a big one. That's huge.
One of the biggest project disasters I was ever involved in, and I was involved to try to save this project, was because there was a major change in stakeholders. Different department took over the project, and no one wanted to reassess or adjust the project in the name of, we don't want to lose momentum.
Yeah, right.
And and that momentum carried them right over the cliff.
Yeah. That happens. It happens with some frequency, actually. It's often easier to just say yes and keep going, than it is to say no. There's one other thing I wanted to bring up. It's almost more fundamental, something you see fairly frequently. If you've ever been in a status meeting, a project status meeting, and everyone's silent and just getting through the meeting ends early, I'm going to give you back 5, 10, 20 minutes of the meeting, of your day. And everybody's happy with that and they move on. And there's silence between the meetings. So if you have silence at the end of these sort of meetings, at the end of your team meetings, if you have silence between your team meetings, that's not a good sign. People aren't talking about the why. People aren't talking about substantive things. If you're just talking about status, it's just something is fundamentally wrong with your project if that's happening. I think that's an easy one to spot, but people brush right over that all the time. They're happy to have less meetings and less to do, but it's a problem. That's almost a sure sign of having a problem.
Boy, it is. And, we have a member-only virtual happy hour, basically, that we just had one today with our members. And we were talking about the idea of provocation to try to spice things up, to try to get people engaged. So do you have any pro tips for how, if we're sitting in our status meeting, we give status and I hear crickets and I don't hear any questions, I don't hear anything. As a PM, I gotta, that little light comes up. Oh, there might be something wrong. What are some provocations or some things we can do to force engagement when people are sort of disengaged?
If you're a project manager who understands the implications of really everything you're doing in the project, you're talking to team members by default, even if you're just asking for status, they're going to bring up some blocker that, sort of under the table or whatever, something that maybe they don't want to tell everyone, maybe they do, but there are ways of speaking to those things that imply, what the implications are on the rest of the team, the implications for the project, the implications for the business, and starting conversations of substance, critical conversations. There's that. And then if you know where people are misaligned, this person is misaligned with that person in terms of the value you're creating or in terms of what the blockers are, any of those things, those are easy things to sort of work through and say, and you can also have to say who's misaligned or whatever. You can say, there's this perspective and there's that perspective. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's real and talk about what we need to do about these things, because I think we need to it's just having those substantive conversations, the conversations that matter, that I think you want to lead people to. And those are contextual. Those are things that are, you can't say the same thing every time, There's no real formula to it. It's just understanding where you're going as a business, as a project, and being able to speak to the issues that need to be resolved.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Can you remind our listeners where they can learn more about you? You got any books, speaking engagements? What's coming up for you?
I have an old book from 2011, but you can leave that alone.
Okay. Don't get Dave Garrett's book from 2011.
Please, for the love of God, no. It's too old now. But I would say the Project Success Report is out there, and that's an interesting read. So if you go to pmi.org/project success, you'll find that there. We have a lot of wonderful AI resources under pmi.org/AI. So there's classes you can take. There's research papers on the changing ways that project managers are working. There's a lot of great materials there. Oh yeah, if you'd like to reach me, LinkedIn is probably the best way to do that. So LinkedIn/Dave Garrett, or just search on my name. I'm also at dave.garrett@pmi.org. And we would love to see all of you at the PMI Global Summit, coming up in November in Phoenix, Arizona, November 12th to 15th. There's a lot that's going to be happening there around more. We're going to be doing more with more. And we're going to be doing more with AI and, more with a lot of very important leading edge topics within project management. So it'll be a really good time if you can make it.
Now that we know you're coming, Dave, we're going to be expecting you at our sessions that we're giving.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I can't wait to hear.
All right, Dave, thanks so much for joining us. And as we get the next round, we're going to ask you to propose a virtual toast.
Virtual toast. All right. Everybody raise a glass. I wish I had a glass one that I could ping with my fork.
For me, it's always water. There's no shame in a water glass.
All right. So may every project leader find a way to do more. So more, MORE, and maximize the value they produce, and have this project lead to an even more meaningful opportunity on a personal level too. So I think when you end up doing more, you do more for the project, more for the organization, and it ultimately more for yourself. You lay the groundwork for a greater career.
Agreed.
So cheers.
Cheers to that.
Absolutely. Cheers. And that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show, please leave a review and a comment on iTunes or wherever you get our podcast. Your review really does mean a lot. And if you want to check out our membership site and all of our cool content there, you can check that out at pmhappyhour.com/membership. If you want to talk to us directly about project management, PM consulting, training, or whatever, our contact info is on our website under About Your Hosts, or you can just hit us up on our Facebook site at PM Happy Hour. You'll find we're really pretty easy to get a hold of there. And that's it for today. Good luck with your projects, and we hope to catch you again at the next PM Happy Hour. Cheers.